Welcome back to another episode of the Weekly Coder, everybody. This is Chris, and this week we are going to continue working on our 2048 game. What are we going to do this week, you asked? Well, last week we created an undo button. This week we're going to create an undo button. Another button. Something other than an undo button. A button that will undo, but not undo. A button that will get us back to where we wanted to be originally, like 20 minutes ago. So, the first thing we got to do to make this button, to make this magical thing appear, is we have to create the button. Didn't I just say create the button? Let's create the button. Alright, so we're going to go to our HUD canvas, where we have our other button. And that button is simply just named button. But you know what? For the sake of keeping things named properly so that we can find them easier, let's change this to undo button. And then we're going to right click on it and click on duplicate. Alright, so now we have undo button 1. Well, let's go ahead and name this one something else. Let's call it save game. So, you may have realized that by adding a save game button, that's really, really awesome, and we can save the game at any point, but what about if we want to load the game? We're going to need a button for that, right? So let's duplicate the save game button. And we're going to call this one load game. Alright. So let's find the save game button. Let's grab our transform tool. And you may not see it here, but it's definitely underneath the please undo button. So this has still got the same text, please undo. And then we've got load game, which is also here. And we are like running out of space. So see what this looks like. Alright, so what we're going to do is we are going to shorten the text on these buttons to make them look a little better. So I'm just going to basically go and click on the disclosure triangle next to each button. There's a text component on the button, and that's where we're going to change this. Alright, so we're going to call this is actually the undo button, so let's not get confused here. Whoa. Alright, and then we're going to do the load button. That's going to be load. And this is going to be save. So now these buttons can all be a little smaller than what they are right now. So we're going to do width, we're just going to do 100. And, this is just to show, proof of concept. Like I said, I'm not trying to make things look pretty here. You guys can, of course, at your own discretion, make prettier buttons. These are just to serve a function, and that's all they're going to do. Alright, so before we do anything else, let's go ahead and go into our scripts folder and open up the game script, because I want to go ahead and create the save and load methods so that we can add those actions to our button, so that we don't forget later and wonder why our buttons aren't working. Because, we do that. So, well, I do. You guys probably don't, because you're absolutely watching the video, and you probably will type the mistakes I make, because the mistakes are there to be typed. But, yeah. So we're going to go to where we created our other methods. So we have our undo method here, we've got our play again, and right beneath the undo method we'll just do a public save game what is wrong here? Public void save game, and public void load game. And this is going to be extremely simple. This isn't going to be one of those save methods where you can create a save file and then have multiple save files and then load a specific file, although that would be fun. Right? We've got our methods created. We're going to save that and then head back over to Unity and go to each of our buttons. And since we duplicated these, they're already going to have the game object in the onClick event handlers. So we just need to change the method from game undo to game save game. And the load button is going to get game load game. Alright. So we've got our methods defined, we've got them created. Alright, so everything here is good. So we can, like, get out of Unity for a little while and go play in Mono Develop for a bit. So, the save is going to work much like the undo. What we're going to do is we're going to use player prefs. We're not going to use player prefs because player preferences can only store integers and floats and strings. And if we want to store something like the previous grid, for instance, because the previous grid, remember, gets updated every time the player makes a move with the previous grid, obviously. So, in order to store something like that, we would need to do a whole bunch of other stuff. And when I'm saying saving, I mean saving to disk. So that if we quit Unity and open Unity back up, we can load from that point. But that's not what we're trying to build. What we're trying to build is saving the game state of our current game. So we're playing, and we get to a point where we're like, oh wow, okay, so this looks really good. I want to save right here, just in case I mess something up in the future, so that I can come back to this location. So what we're going to do is, I think we'll create another grid like previous grid, okay, and then we're going to store all the contents of previous grid or of the current grid in that grid when the player presses save game. All right, so now we've got a game plan. All right, so we're going to call this public static, and it's going to also store not a tiles. Oops. And we're going to call this saved grid. New, not a tile, grid width, grid height. Alright. So, alright, so the player presses save game. So, whatever the player currently has on the screen is what the player is going to want to save. So, what we're going to do is we're going to iterate for, and actually, for x equals 0, x is less than grid width, and plus, oops, for int y equals 0, y is less than grid height, y plus plus. Alright, so we're doing this, and then, let's see here. Transform. We're going to make sure that there's nothing in that location first, so save grid, xy equals null. So we're nulling out that location in save grid. And then we're going to check if grid xy doesn't equal null, meaning that there's something there, obviously. Then we want to take that and we store transforms in there. So we're going to do transform t equals grid xy. So now we have the transform of a tile. So we can get at the properties of that tile, and we can assign a not a tile. So, alright, so now we get the location. So we're going to do a vector2 location equals t dot local position, and we're going to do a value. So t dot get component tile dot tile value. Alright, so these are the only things we need. Now we can create a not tile. So not a tile equals new not a tile. And then we're going to assign those two properties. So not a tile dot location equals location, and not a tile dot value equals value. And finally, we're going to take our save game grid x and y, and we're going to assign the not a tile to that location. Alright, so basically this is the same kind of code that that we're using for storing into the previous grid. Alright, so I'm just going to cover this really quick. What we got going on here is we have a method named saveGame that gets called when the user presses the save game button. Then we have a for loop, x equals 0, x is less than grid width. That basically means that it's going to go from x0 to the max grid width. And while it's doing that, for every iteration, it's also going to check all the y's. So it's going to start with x0, then go y0, y1, y2, y3, and then once it's done with that, it's going to go to the next x and do all the y's. So that's kind of how it iterates over the matrix of tiles in the grid. So then what we're doing is we're saying, hey, in this saved grid, x, y location, we're going to say, okay, well, we're going to set nothing there. Because at this point, we don't need anything there. Here's where it happens. We're going to check grid xy doesn't equal null, right? If there is nothing there, or if there is something there, meaning that it doesn't equal null, if there's something there, then we want to get the transform that's stored at that location, right? That's what we're doing here. We're saying, hey, we're going to create a variable, call it t, and then we're going to of type transform, and then we're going to assign whatever is at that location in the grid. And then we're going to get some value back from that. We're going to create some variables, a location variable, a value variable. This one's a vector2 and an integer. And we're just going to get the local position, and we're going to get the tile value of the tile that is at that transform in the grid. So what we're going to do then is we're going to create a new not a tile object. And the not a tile has two properties, the location and the value. So then we get our location and our value that we got from this transform that was stored in this grid, and we assign it to that, and then we take that object, the not a tile object, and we assign it to the save grid at those x and y coordinates. Alright, so that stores it, that saves it, and that saves it exactly how it is at the very moment that they press the button. So now, what we got to do is we got to make sure that they can load that up. Alright, so we want to be able to have them click the load button and have it go back exactly the way it was when they clicked the save button. Alright. So how do we do that? Well, if we look back at our method up here, we can kind of see what's going on. Alright, so we want to implement that same kind of thing. If made first move, remember, because that part actually helps us determine whether or not the user can even load the game. If he hasn't made the first move, then of course he can't load a game. Simple enough, right? Actually, you know what? Let's do something else. Save game. So we're going to create another Boolean. Let's go up here. And right here we have bool made first move, right? We're not going to use that. We're going to use saved game. Right? So when the game first starts, that means that the game has not been saved yet. So there's nothing to do with the loading of a game. We can't load a game if we haven't saved one. So what we'll do is, where's that damn method at? Alright, we're going to say here, we're going to say saved game equals true. So when the user presses the save game button, it'll basically set save game to true. Alright, so, and there's something interesting here we got to think about. Do we want to leave it so that when the user presses the load game, that it erases the previously saved game and loads the game that they saved, but then they can't load it again if they want? Or do we just leave it there so that they can reload it forever and ever? I'm thinking that right now we're just going to leave it. So the first thing we'll do then is we say if saved game, meaning that the game has been saved, we can do some code. So the first thing we'll do here is we also need to save the score. All right. So let's do another one. Let's do where do we have previous score? Previous score, and then we'll create another private int and call this saved score. Also set that to 0. And the saved score will basically be saved when the user presses the save button. And that is going to happen right here. We'll do saved score equals score. So the current score. And at that point, we're going to set score to saved score. Oops. Score equals saved score. And then we're going to call update score. Alright, so that takes care of our score. Now we just need to do a for each, and we're going to transform child and transform, and we're going to destroy child.game. So we're destroying all of the tiles that are currently in our transform. Alright, so after we do that, we're going to create this loop again. X equals 0, x is less than grid width. Oops, x plus plus. For y equals 0, y is less than grid height, y plus plus. Y must have to me. Alright, and at that point, let's set grid xy to null. So the current position of the wrapper is at null, and we're going to do another tile, we're creating another tile object because we're going to get another tile from our save game array. So save game xy. Oops, save grid. Not paying attention. Alright, so if another tile doesn't equal null, meaning that there's something there, we're going to say int tile value equals another tile value, and string new tile name equals tile underscore and then concatenate tile value, and game object new tile game object instantiate resources load new tile name type of game object and another tile location and identity, and this is supposed to be a capital G. Oops. Alright, so now we do new tile transform parent equals transform, and finally grid xy equals new tile transform. You guys should remember this because this is basically a ripoff from the from last week's video. I mean, it's a little different, but same concept. Alright, instead of saving every time the user makes a move so that we can go back to our previous position, we're saving when the user presses the button. So the code really isn't that different. It's actually almost exactly the same. Literally identical. Except for we've got some new variables and stuff, but anyways. So, with all of that, we should be able to make this work. I'm just going to cover this load method one more time, right? So we're checking to see if the game has been saved. If it has been saved, then we're setting the score equal to the saved score. Then we call the update score method, which actually updates the score visually. And then we iterate over all of the children that are part of the game transform, which is actually part of the grid game object, which lists all of the current tiles physically that are part of that game object. So then we destroy all of those because we're getting ready to recreate all of them from the saved grid. And we do that by iterating over this for loop and over this for loop to basically iterate over the matrix. We set the grid xy to null for the current position because we don't care what's there at the moment because we're going to fill it, and if it's not going to get filled then it's going to be null anyways. We grab a not a tile game object from the save grid at the location that we're currently at within the for loop iterations. We then check to see if it's null. If it isn't, then we know we're good and we're going to get some values from it. We then use these values to instantiate a new game object, which is a new tile. We then set that new tile as a parent. We set the current parent of the tile as the transform. Okay? This transform, meaning the game. We then go and we set the new tile's transform as the object that gets stored in that grid array at the current XY location. Alright, so we'll save that, and with any luck, it should all work. Alright, game still plays like it should, or that is yet to be seen. We haven't pressed the button yet. Okay, so we got 2 2s. So I'm going to just play for a couple seconds here and get to something that we can recognize. I think that's very recognizable. But you know what? Just to prove it, I'm going to take a screenshot. Alright, so we've got our screenshot. And I'm going to save. We should probably have some kind of indicator that that our game was saved. Alright. So let's do some stuff. So we really kind of screwed things up here, so let's click load. I mean, that looks good to me. Hey, even our score went back, I think. Everything looks good. So I'm going to call that a successful tutorial of creating a game save state. And if you want, you can take this a step further. It'll take some more research on your part. And I may throw up a video on this. Even though I want this to be the last video in the series, I don't want to make this series too long. I'm already 12 episodes in. That's like a 3-month time span of nothing but 2048 tutorials. I know you guys are probably getting tired of that, but in any case, what's going to happen after the last episode in the series, I'm going to take a short break, maybe a month or two, to plan for a new series, and I don't know what that's going to be yet. I'm still listening to you guys for suggestions, so anything you can come up with, just let me know. I don't know really if I should cover anything else in this. Nope, I'm just going to leave it as it is. I'll see you guys next week. Take care. Oh, hey, if you like the video, give me a thumbs up, and don't forget, you can subscribe to this channel, and if you do, cool things will happen, I promise. You're going to get a Lamborghini for Christmas, and, a Ferrari, and a house, or you could just be notified when I put out new videos, which is also cool. So anyways, yeah, subscribe, click the bell, thumbs up if you like the video, share it with your friends. I'll see you guys next week.